Welcome back. In this episode, we are taking a different approach with a panel discussion on interoperability and digital quality measures, aptly named the Fireside Chat. And in the interop context, one can't be taken seriously without a few bad fire puns. So with this, I'd like to start with a panel intro. And as you're probably well aware, FHIR is probably one of the biggest and catchy buzzwords that you're hearing, and I know that we hear today and that we're definitely interested in. And aptly so. Let's get right into it from our panel's perspective and where we are in focusing our efforts, and we'll put both feet in the fire with what is top of mind as you look at where we are in this digital transformation of the clinical data ecosystem and where are we headed. So Monica, let me start with you.
Well, today we're seeing healthcare and administrative data being captured electronically at the source more and more. Think telemedicine, virtual physician visits, home health monitoring, and more. So generating quality measurements in the future will depend on your organization's ability to ingest and process electronic data both internally and from shared multi-stakeholder sources. This is the future. Organizations will not be able to stay out of it.
And Maria?
Yeah, data-driven actions are a proven method to drive improvement and customer satisfaction. Our current pandemic situation and a response as a whole, it has been made a clear use case for the need of interoperability.
Yeah, and I will say change is good. So, embrace it, especially with interoperability. I know I've been saying this long enough for everybody to probably be tired of hearing it, but I am convinced more than ever that this digital transformation, which we're going through in healthcare, will have significant benefits for all major stakeholders, patients, providers, and payers. And it's not a pipe dream anymore. So I would say let's get on with it.
Well, all righty then. Let's start with a question to Maria. Talking to health plan clients, how is the measurement year 2020 shaping up? What are health plans asking about? What are they concerned about? Any insights you can give us?
The current concern, as you can imagine, is that the HEDIS season is just around the corner. On account of the pandemic, there are concerns surrounding chart chases and supplemental data primary source verification. ECDS measure adoption has been slow, and there are still challenges with ingesting the appropriate data that is available on the HL7. We know that the number of digital measures will keep increasing. So while Medicare is still not requiring reporting of ECDS measures, Medicaid states have started including them. And that means that, there's going to be more and more uptake in terms of needing to be able to code for them.
Yeah. So there may be some folks at home that are joining us for the first time and not familiar with that term or abbreviation for ECDS, and that stands for Electronic Clinical Data System measures. Mari, can you briefly explain the difference between the traditional measures and ECDS measures?
So for the most part, the most significant difference is that these measures require electronic data, and that's got to be categorized by the individual source system of records in a hierarchy. So these SSORs are going to be the EHR, the HIE, the case management system, and then administrative data.
So Maria, I have a question on that. So ECDS measures are intended to make it easier to use data from EMRs and other electronic sources. Do plans truly take advantage of that, or are they simply just taking the sources, supplemental data sources they have been using and mapping the data to the ECDS measures?
You're correct, Michael. Plans are using EMR feeds, but not as effectively as they could be using them. There's definitely a lot of mapping of data that is still ongoing.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something we talked about in a previous episode where we discussed the operating models, which are all about sourcing data in this new digital ecosystem. And, Monica, from a data operations perspective, what do you see as the major drivers to adoption and success?
Yes, it's time to rethink and reassess the organization's data management best practices, strategy, and roadmap. Revisit your principles of data governance, information sources, and rules. Incorporate FHIR standards and rules into your vendor agreements to leverage API services. That's just to name a few. All of the above and more should be incorporated into your organization's blueprint for a successful transition to digital quality measures.
So there's much that can be done that goes beyond digital quality measures in the narrower sense. So the benefits we discussed in another video can really be fully realized when leveraging all these new developments.
It just occurred to me that we have talked a lot about HEDIS measures and all of the NTQA incentives. Reed, you know the broader measure world, including pharmacy measures, very well. Are digital quality measures adopted for pharmacy measures and other measures relevant to payers?
Well, good question. And the answer is yes and no. We do know people or companies out there that are creating their own DQMs from the traditional measure specifications. There's different pilot tests or use cases that are going on to better understand how to develop and implement digital quality measures. I do know that PQA has its data and interoperability advisory group as they pursue pharmacy level measures and using interoperable data sources, as well as looking at different things from partnering or working with data aggregators. And of course, there's all the efforts that are underway or coming out of the leadership of CMS as well. And so, Michael, I know this isn't a technical discussion, but I think this would be helpful for the audience. Many people who deal with quality would like to know what digital quality measures actually look like and how it works. Is that something we can take a peek at? I know you've been doing a fair amount of hands-on work around this.
Yeah, and love to share some of that. Actually, it's very timely too, because NCQA just a couple of weeks ago released the first FHIR CQL test measures. So that's the standard that is clearly where all the measures are going to go in the future. And I'll start with a recap just of the key concepts. And we'll take a look inside the breast cancer screening measure right after that. So what you see on the screen here is essentially what NCQA calls the current HEDIS structure, the current digital measure structure, and the future. So there's three components to that. CQL is kind of at the heart of it, if you will. It's the clinical quality language, which doesn't really change much between the old and the new. And we'll look at CQL in a minute. And then there is the data model below that. So in the old, it's the quality data model, which really defines all the data elements and has limitations, which was one of the reasons we're switching to the FHIR R4 data model, which again, you see on the right. And then, there's a confusion because there's sort of FHIR is being discussed primarily as an API standard, but in this context, it's both the API standard, which is really the bigger orange box here, which represents all the data that actually is being used in the context of the measure, and then the actual measure definition or data element definition that are part of the definition of the measure itself, which is the data model part of the FHIR. So they're not mutually exclusive, but they're separate and often confusing. So I think it's useful to have an understanding there's two aspects to FHIR. Now, let me share with you what a CQL measure actually looks like. And so here we go. What we're looking at is CQL, so the clinical quality language. It has a combination of things that look a lot like code and a combination of things that look a lot like actually the specifications. And that's exactly as it is intended. It's really intended as a very clear definition that can be translated into code of the measures itself. So in this case, we're looking at BCS. We have probably about a couple hundred lines of, I don't want to say code, but of definitions in here. It includes things like declarations using FHIR, which programmers are very familiar with the concept. So basically it's, you know, this uses an external reference that can be incorporated when you run a program or compile a program. And then there's all kinds of things that also recur in the spec itself. So value sets is one of them, right? So we see all these value set definitions, and they also have an external reference in many cases. So again, that points to a resource that keeps those updated. So usually a good amount of value sets in every measure. Then there is a number of parameters. So in this case, product line, measure period always needs to be defined. So a lot of these things are being defined, and then we go further down into other artifacts and concepts. In this case, for example, it says is an applicable product line, which means, you know, is in the population, does this measure apply to this product line? Does this measure apply to this patient? So all that is clearly defined in the CQL, and I'm just going to keep scrolling down. The administrative specifications, again, then we eventually get to denominators, and numerators, and they're defined, and all the rules that basically then get us to a numerator hit or a numerator negative conclusion. So that's the CQL. So that's really what we typically work on when we say we're developing a measure. The second part I just want to show really briefly is something called the ELM. So ELM is essentially a more executable version of that CQL. And we'll see in a minute essentially how all that hangs together. But this is an XML document that is quite a bit longer, as you can see on the scroll button here. There's a lot of that stuff here that essentially gets generated off the CQL. And it is intended to truly be consumed by a computer, and therefore needs to be much more specific, and in some cases much more explicit for that to happen. So the CQL and the ELM are two major pieces of that. And I'm just going to throw it back to you at this point.
Great. And I think looking at the CQL is really helpful just to make it feel a bit more real. And so from what we can see, it's pretty abstract, a lot of technical detail though. But in other words, you know, the definitions don't really point to actual data the measure will need to be applied to. And I know there's more to measure execution than what we're just looking at. Can you briefly cover that?
Yeah, let's pull up a slide and talk through that real quick. So like I mentioned, the CQL is kind of where things start, right? So in this representation here, we have obviously more than one measure, so multiple measures all represented or written in FHIR CQL, which will then be generated, or I don't want to use the word compile, but it's sort of a transformation or generation of the ELM. And the ELM eventually can then be used in a runtime engine. In other words, a program that takes data, looks at a set of population data, applies the rules, the ELM, to those, and then writes out the results. So the left two pieces, or let's say the left stages all the way up to register, we sometimes, or I like to refer to as the build time. In other words, getting the measure ready to run it. And then the right side is what I call the runtime, which is basically the engine's ready to be run on different sets of data over and over again. So that at a very high level describes exactly how FHIR measures, or FHIR CQL measures, I should say, actually get applied to the actual data and how we generate the outcome results or the measure determination.
Thank you, Michael.
Sure.
So this change to FHIR CQL, will this cause a collective groan from the developer community that are trying to get on board with ECDS? And now I hear you say that the future will be FHIR CQL.
There may be some groans. I think generally the folks who are embracing the ECDS measures are going to be not too unhappy, because in the end, QDM CQL is very close to FHIR CQL, and I think a lot of people are very excited about FHIR and overcoming the limitations of the QDM. So I don't expect too much groaning there. I think the broader question is also, what does development mean? Now remember, with entity or organizations or measure authors like NCQA publishing those measures, developers don't need to develop measures anymore. They should just consume them and have an engine to run them in, right? So the whole concept kind of shifts around too. And I think that's part of the broader change that we should be thinking about.
Michael, for those business and system analysts in the audience, what suggestions do you have for how they might partner with their development communities?
Yeah, so a similar thing applies, right? So I think the definition of development sort of changes. And of course, there's the need to move data and transform data and all these things. They don't necessarily go away. But ultimately, I think the focus should be less on the measure itself, but how do you really transform that data operations chain, what we talk about a lot as operating models? How do you optimize that, and how do you use the standards and all the new developments like aggregators in the most optimal way? I think that's where they will be adding the most value if they really take that approach of how can we leverage all these new developments.
Great. Well, so let's put a fire out by closing with a rapid fire round. Haha. In one sentence from the panel, what should people take away from this conversation about digital quality measures and the massive transformation that we are going through? Maria.
It's not too late.
Yep.
It's not too late. Although changes are happening quickly, especially going forward, there is time for health plans to plan and make the transformation successfully. It is important to get started ASAP, though.
Monica?
It's important for everyone to know that you can be a transformational leader. You can be a driving force. Regardless of your role in your organization, you have a tremendous opportunity to improve operations, save costs, and improve quality of care. Only if you lead your organization beyond just adapting your legacy data management approaches to merely stay compliant.
And Michael?
Yeah, I want to say you're not alone. I've been in this interoperability and digital quality journey for a few years now. And I still get stuck sometimes. And so if you find yourself in one of those, I don't get it, or what am I missing moments, it's not you, it's not me, it's all of us, right? So leverage the community, for example. Definitely I recommend to be part of the NCQA digital measure community. And reach out to your peers, reach out to us, and contribute to forums, because at this point, every question, every comment, every statement, if you share it, will benefit all of us and move us forward even faster.
Yeah, that's great takeaways for the audience. And just to close it out, to Michael's point, as well as others, we're here, we got you covered. Of course we are, and we want to be very active in the community, sharing information, ideas, videos like these, and blogs. But we're also consultants that are specializing in digital quality measures and interoperability, and obviously the traditional quality performance measures. And we spend a lot of time keeping up with the regulation, understanding standards, developing those tools, and implementing best practices so that you can benefit from our work and leverage our expertise and really allow for you to focus on what's important for you in your day-to-day workflows. Well, thank you to our panelists today, and I'd like to thank you for your support throughout the series, and thank you to our audience for joining us, whether it's today or throughout the series as well. In our final episode 10, we will be concluding the series where we talk about how we can help you with your QM project and through our approach assessment and next steps with that. So please stay tuned for episode 10 as we wind down 2020. And please reach out to us, sooner rather than later. If you have any questions on any of the videos or today's panel discussion, or how Kaiser Healthcare Solutions and our team can help support you. So I hope you all are looking forward to a new year of 2021, and we hope to see you in the future as well. Thank you.